Okay, so let's take a look at the problem we have here. It's a fun one. You're returning the total cost of a pizza order, which I just added a note down here. And everyone can kind of relate to that right now during this quarantine. We're not eating as nice as we normally would be, maybe. So let's take a look at the code you've got so far. I'm just going to hit run. And we're just getting an error here. So I'm just going to clean up some of the syntax errors. If you're continuing on to the next line, you just use a backslash there. It looks like pizza cost needs an underscore. Let me just fix that, and then I'll hit run. Okay, so nothing's printing out because we haven't printed anything. So let me just copy in a function call, which I typed out earlier. So here I'm defining a pizza order, which is the same one as the example you gave. And here I'm just calling it. And this is just a little neater way to do it than to put the order directly into there. So it's returning 15, which doesn't seem right. It should be at least the cost of 3 pizzas, which are $13 each. So let's take a look at where we're calculating our price. So here we're returning a total. And I highly recommend using print statements to show how values are being printed. And since I don't really know what's going on yet, I'm just going to put in these 3 print statements. You see our total is dependent of 3 things: our drinks, our toppings, and our pizza cost. So I'm going to print all those values out. And we see our drinks is getting calculated correctly. We have 1 small drink. Our toppings are not getting calculated correctly, and our pizza cost is also not getting calculated correctly. You see it's 13 when it should be 3 times 13. So let's go up here. We're calculating pizza cost equals the length of pizza times 13. Well, that seems right. That makes sense to me. The number of pizzas times 13 per pizza. Let's make sure we're passing in the right value for pizza. So I'm just going to print out pizza. That looks kind of weird. So this is the value that gets passed in. As you can see, it's wrapped in parentheses, and it's got this weird comma at the end. And the reason for that is when you pass in something in Python, it actually, and you put an asterisk, which is that star before pizza, it actually passes it in as a tuple. And a tuple looks something like this. You got something first, comma, and then something second. And because you're just passing in this list, it populates the first part with the list, and then it leaves the second part empty, which is why you see a comma and then an end parenthesis. So we don't need to copy it in as a tuple. We could just send it in as a list. So instead of putting a star pizza, let's just put pizza in and see what it prints out now. Cool. So we have a list of lists, and that's going to be fine to work with. And you can see as soon as I ran that, our pizza cost changed. Now, instead of printing out 13, it's printing out 3 times 13, which is correct. So all we really need to change now is the toppings. And I know you were asking about that. So let's take a look at what you've got. You're saying 4 toppings in pizza. So the first time this is going to run through, what's toppings going to equal? That's how I like thinking about loops. I think about what are our variables during each iteration. So the first iteration, toppings is getting assigned to the first element in pizza, which is the empty list. And we're saying toppings then equals, okay, so we're reassigning this value. Toppings now equals pizza.count. So this looks kind of weird because we're giving toppings a value in this statement, and then we're using pizza. We're never really using the value that we gave toppings. And pizza.count is going to look at our list of pizzas, which I printed out in the console over to the right, and it's going to count how many instances of pepperoni we have. And the thing is, when you use count like this, it's going to check for strings. It's not going to check for lists. It's not going to check inside of each of these lists for a string. Even though the second list has pepperoni, it just sees it as a list, and it doesn't dive inside of the list to check. So you actually have to go over each pie in your pizza order. So instead of calling this toppings, or you can actually call it toppings, instead of calling pizza.count, we actually want to call toppings.count for all of these. That, if you need a little more clarification, just ask a question below and I'll get to it. But again here, we don't want to assign toppings to this result, because then on the next iteration, when we have just pepperoni, it's going to reassign our next toppings to pepperoni, and we're going to lose whatever we put in toppings. So instead, let's create a new variable, toppings cost, and then we'll say toppings cost plus equals. So we'll be adding, we'll set that equal to 0. We'll be adding whatever cost of this next pizza is for its toppings to our total. And then when we calculate our total, let's put in toppings cost. Now let's see what we get instead. Toppings cost. So let me print out toppings cost instead of toppings. So now we're getting 4.5 instead of 0, which makes sense because we have one of each type of topping, which add up to 4.5. So that looks like it's working now. So if you have any questions, please just let me know and I'll get to it as quickly as I can. I hope that helps.